Yeah, Duane. Uh, I would like Duane to maybe uh, connect me with the Pakistani who has opted to do the translations. He has talked about the language is not conventional or whatever. I'll have just some few words to advise him, some few things to tell him about as he goes about his work. You know, when they talk of Duane the great writer, uh, some people think about. I've heard Master Allen Feldman. He was capitalizing on the language too and all that stuff. Being a great master, great writer, is not to come off from my perspective anyway. It's not to fall in this trap of conventionalism and all the like. The material that you bring out from the amount of material brought down from the real universes to this level of life, which has never been done before, and the books the books are the writings are continually coming out. That is what makes the great writer, because it's writing on things that people have never written, but people are looking at it from the a very limited angle, taking into consideration some kind of social norms, some writing etiquette, and all that stuff. Being a great writer, like it was said in the real universes, and you were given you were the masters, the real guys told you you'll be a great master. In my opinion, it's not that you come here and be some kind of linguistic or whatever conventional linguistic champion or something like that. It's the quantity of material. It's the amount of material that the earth has never known that we're going to bring down here. That's where the greatness lies, and in many other things that they cannot see. So then I would like to be connected to this young man. He's touched something about said something about the language, and I've studied various forms of language, so I would like to just tell him some few words as he goes about his translations. Let him not carry that in his head. I will have something to tell him. Yeah, Duane.
That's fine, young man. And what I'll do is I'll stick it in your Skype, okay? Or would you want it somewhere else on Facebook? I'll put his name in there.
Yeah.
Is your Skype okay?
Yeah, my Skype is okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to say something on this, and I get it, what Freddie's saying, and I see that. And again, this is where you have to be the risk taker, but this is where I'm constantly writing different views, and I'll write another one here, defining this, better defining it for people to understand, and that is that, and people have to do their own homework, you might say. Again, look at, I use the birds as an example. I use the sun, of course, but just look at birds as an example. Do any of them do what people do? With all these ideas that are going on in the world that are contributing to the demise of the planet very rapidly, do birds do any of this? And so with what we're presenting compared to what has been, and just like in the Shariat and whatever, I was there in those days, yes. And Paul wrote those of a particular to get people started. But now they've all become restrictions, and people bow and kneel because of Joni's brought in worshiping and prayer. They bow and kneel to restrictions is really what they're doing, and they don't see it. They feel that they're safe with these restrictions, just like most of the public with the governments and whatever, saying that, oh, you have rights, but you really don't. Do birds need a document saying they have rights? It's silly stuff. They don't care about that stuff. They'll just peck holes through it. Okay, but people, compare the two. Look at what people do. And they cage animals too, and they think it's cute, etc. Look at everything that people do. Do birds, do other animals, do they cage each other like people do, and call them pets, etc., and feed them pet food from a processed factory, etc. This is what people do, and so they do the same thing with their ideas, constantly doing it, thinking that there's a better idea, etc. Most of what I've written is just sorting out the funny things that people have agreed to. And, what I suggest is when you talk to these ekas, that, hey, take a look at nature. Does it make sense? Are the birds carrying around a picture of Harry? I don't imply any of these things. And if a person comes and goes, it's like, fine, you have that right. And I've stated many times, I don't negate anything. Everything is fine. You decide, you have the choice. This is how life is. This is how it has to be. It's free will, just like the birds. They fly wherever they want. They don't have the FAA directing their flights. They don't have people in towers telling them, where to go and where to land, etc. People do this. And so when you look at this, when you look at all this, the bigger picture, does any of this world, any of it, make sense? But yet people continually cater to it, and with what I'm presenting, they try and fit it in to their lifestyle. In other words, trying to make sense of it according to their life instead of making sense of it to what it relates to. That becomes the difference. And so, yeah, take a look around. Look at how, the environment is, and then relate to it like that. That gives you a hint as to this true reality. And again, I see the sun shining as pure sincerity because it doesn't stop shining. And so that should give you a hint as to what life is. And then you discover it from there. But again, people utilize their personal self that they've created. It's like building a house. It's like, well, I built this house, and I was born here, and my mother and father built it, or whatever, and I'll stay here till I die. Well, okay, that's your choice, but there is more. So it's a very simple factor, but again, yes, does it make sense to be induced with fear? Are the birds afraid to not believe in something? Are they? You see, there's a good question. But humans are. They're afraid of basically everything because they've been taught to fear. So the birds have no problem. They don't need to believe in anything. They're fine. They're fine with everything. And so, what makes sense now? But again, it's a challenge because, again, we've come through this process. We needed this process to come through. And then to get through it all the way at particular times, it's a heck of a challenge. And the boys have the real situation here and on the real side too, because they do not interfere with free will. Free will is very precious. The individual must choose, no matter how it is. So, yeah, and so we have the challenge, and this is how we also become more aware, is taking on the challenge, and many people won't. So they don't realize that either. So they just simply agree to restriction, thinking that they will be safe. There's no such thing as being safe. There's only life as an isness. And so this is a great opportunity for people to understand this. And eventually, as you get the hang of this, you might say, you start to see how it is being to being, and that recognition is awesome. And it just keeps going from there, more so than any kind of thrill or happiness or so-called personal sensational love and all these things that cling to the personal self. There is a real life available, but you must recognize it, and it is real, more real than anything here, and it is right here in your awareness. So yeah, again, do the birds believe something? Are they reading the Shariat or considering or considering their next initiation? Or gee, if they should they join the corporation or not? Isn't that kind of funny? Ask the birds.
Yeah, thank you. In the Sharia, Portugal says the chela should never consider that his community, his country, or whatever continent he's living on is home to him, but that all the levels of life, all the worlds uh, are home to him and to all other, as it termed them at that time, souls. So he should never consider any particular place to be his home, but that all the universes are home to him and other souls. Was this a foreshadowing of the universal position that you are now expatiating on in detail?
Well, of course, everything is. Everything implies the same true reality, the isness, no matter how it is said or what it is, how it is presented or created or what have you. It all implies the true reality life is, because creation is a place in the whole of life, and the whole of life is an isness. So that's the idea. Remember that little parable that supposedly Jesus said, but whatever. Foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So the thing is, that's the idea. These are little messages really saying that, life is a lot bigger than what you consider just here, your so-called home, your heritage. It's like, oh, I'm African, I'm American, I'm Australian, and this is where I was born. I was in the outback, and these ideas that people cling to when they're just part of what they're going through to eventually recognize the isness life is. And this is what's so cool. This is where I write about so much. We do so many different things because it's all okay. It's not some kind of so-called spiritual framework idea that we're following, that others follow, that is just, again, somebody created that somewhere and people kept adding to it to where it's now what it is. In other words, if you got a temple, you're really cool. Okay, so without a temple, you're like nothing. So if you got the temple, you're in. It's the in thing, just like the churches, etc. So people like to go from one box to another box is really what it is. But again, do the birds do that? Do they build temples? You just, again, ask the birds. Uh, it sounds funny, but it makes sense. And they make sense of their lives. So these things that were said in the past, again, they're references. And this is where you bring in a comparison. Does it make sense? And so you look to your real awareness, the personal self, for the most part, because of how it's been indoctrinated and raised and educated, etc. here, one-dimensionally, is going to consider and most of the time negate anything that makes sense. It just doesn't. It's just going to go along with the system that doesn't make sense. None of this system that we're experiencing, none of it makes sense because it's all destroying the environment that supports us while we're trying to get through this process. That doesn't make sense. None of it. So, and trying to make sense of it, to petition the government, like in the Constitution, is that people have the right. In other words, the slaves have the right to petition their slave owners for grievances. Does that make sense? Do we need slave owners? Do we need a constitution? Do we need these laws? These are written by knuckleheads and controllers, etc. Again, do the birds comply with this nonsense? No. And this is where we're at. Now we don't need it. So yes, I'm fine with everything. Whatever a person wants to do, hey, have fun. And this is where creating a new position makes sense. I'm not petitioning the government for anything. I've created the nonprofits so that I have a recognition of something for those people that do need that help. So I've created many sources, but I don't petition the government for the nonsense and the so-called rights, etc. And maybe these can work on a personal level somewhere. Maybe you can get lower property taxes or something. Yeah, work the system. Yeah, but to think that it's going to get better from something or that, it's still the same system. So again, ask the birds. Actually, that's a good one. Yes, Charles. So these things that Paul created in his day, now people cling to them. And they don't see the restriction of them. They're following the words like people do in the Bible. They're following written words. And I've said many times, what I'm writing is a reference, not a reality. They have made the words and ideas in their minds realities, and they've also embraced the fear of it. It's like, oh my gosh, if I quit the constructed words of the corporation, then I'm going to be in trouble. Well, hey, look at the birds over there in the trees. They don't belong to the corporation. They're fine. Does life or do the so-called real guides or masters not like them because they're not a member of the corporation and they don't have fake initiations? You see, there's a comparison right there. What makes sense? Yeah, so life is big. Yes, and so again, to where it's not that it's home so much, but it's just that what's so cool about the isness is it's endless. And you decide, you go from here to there, you utilize whatever, but you don't need to be attached to it to where that it means more than the whole of life itself. You decide that. You use that comparison. What makes more sense? What is more important? Is your personal life and your job and making that money and getting ahead and looking forward to retirement? You keep pushing your future, you keep creating it and pushing it forward and forward until you're into the next lifetime. Is that more important? Or would it seem to make sense to recognize this isness so that you could surpass all of that, all of it, and stand real and recognize who you really are, free being of real light? Would that make more sense? And even if I just made this stuff up, okay, to me, the fantasy of it would make more sense than what's going on with this world, because this world doesn't make sense at all. Especially us in the United States with the political system that's going on now. It only gets worse, and it's going to get worse. That's a guarantee. It never gets better. Guarantee is it gets worse. So, funny place, isn't it, Charles?